The word had spread across 3 counties like wildfire at a hay festival. Eleanor Marsh was looking for a foreman. And she wasn't doing interviews. Nope. She was doing something way more entertaining. By 8 in the morning. The Marsh Ranch had more visitors than a county fair. Cowboys lined up along the fence, some looking confident, most looking like they were already regretting their life choices. Word had gotten around about Devil's Shadow, the massive jet-black stallion that had apparently made it his personal mission to destroy every human being who got within 10 feet of him. Ellie stood on the top fence rail, arms crossed, watching the crowd with sharp green eyes that didn't miss a thing. She was maybe 35 with sun-weathered skin, dark auburn hair pulled back no nonsense under a worn hat, and the kind of straight spine that said she'd been carrying heavy loads for a long time and wasn't about to apologize for it. "Here's the deal," she called out, her voice carrying clear across the yard. "My ranch needs a foreman. Best foreman I can get. But I don't have time for interviews and fancy talking men who look good on paper but can't hack it when things get real." She jerked her thumb toward the corral where Devil's Shadow was already pacing like he smelled trouble. "That horse is the best judge of character I know. You ride him for 8 seconds. The job's yours. Fair wage, good bunk, and a real stake in this operation if you prove your worth. Simple as that. What if we can't ride him?" Someone called from the crowd. Ellie smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. "Then you weren't the right man for the job. 25 cowboys tried." It was something between a rodeo and a horror show. First guy up was Big Tom Calloway from Billings, built like a barn door, been riding since before he could walk, or so he said. Devil's Shadow had him eating dirt in approximately 2 seconds. The crowd winced. Next guy barely got his foot in the stirrup before the stallion went sideways and launched him into the fence. He walked away limping and wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The third, fourth, and fifth guys lasted maybe 3 seconds combined. By the 10th cowboy, people had stopped cheering and started just watching with their mouths open. Devil's Shadow wasn't just bucking, he was tactical about it, like he'd studied each rider and found their weakness in about half a second. Mean, smart, and completely unbothered by human ego. By the 20th cowboy, even the most confident guys in line were starting to look a little pale. One dude just straight up walked away when his turn got close, mumbling something about a prior engagement. Ellie watched it all from the fence, expression unreadable, though once or twice she had to hide a smile when yet another loudmouth hit the ground after spending 10 minutes bragging about his riding skills. That's when she noticed him to been there the whole time. This quiet guy at the back of the crowd, lean, medium height. Nothing flashy about him worn but well-kept clothes. A hat that had seen better days, a face that gave absolutely nothing away. While every other cowboy was watching the riders, he was watching the horse just standing there real still, chewing on a piece of grass, studying Devil's Shadow with calm, patient eyes like he was reading a book. She had counted 24 failed riders. This quiet stranger was number 25. "You're up," she called to him. He took his time walking to the gate, didn't swagger, didn't perform, didn't acknowledge the crowd at all, just walked over to the corral fence and stopped, not going in yet, just stood there looking at Devil's Shadow. The stallion looked back, snorting, tossing his massive head, ready to destroy another human being. The quiet cowboy didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept looking at the horse like they were having a private conversation. Nobody else was invited to, "You gonna get in there?" or just stare at him all day? Someone in the crowd called out, getting laughs. The quiet cowboy didn't answer, didn't even look at who said it. Ellie leaned forward on the fence. "You got a name, cowboy?" He glanced at her then, just briefly. "Caleb." "Well, Caleb, that horse has thrown 24 men today. You sure you want to do this?" He looked back at Devil's Shadow for another long moment. Then the smallest, quietest, almost smile crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply, and opened the gate asterisk. Nobody was laughing anymore. The crowd had gone so quiet you could hear the wind moving through the grass and the creak of the fence rails and absolutely nothing else. 24 cowboys had walked into that corral cocky and come out eating dirt. This quiet guy named Caleb just walked in like he was strolling into church on Sunday morning. Devil's Shadow immediately went to work. The stallion spun to face Caleb, ears pinned flat, nostrils flared, hooves churning up the dirt. He was enormous up close, 16 hands of pure bad attitude, muscles rippling under that jet black coat. He'd destroyed 24 men today and barely broken a sweat doing it. Caleb stopped walking, just stopped about 15 feet from the horse and stood there. That was it. That was the whole move. He just stood there, weight relaxed, hands loose at his sides, making himself about as threatening as a fence post. Devil's Shadow snorted and charged, not a full charge, a test charge, the kind horses do to see if you'll break and run. Caleb didn't run, didn't step back, didn't even tense up. He turned sideways just slightly, just enough, presenting his shoulder instead of his chest. Dropping his gaze away from the horse's eyes, the stallion pulled up short about 6 feet away. Confused, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Humans were supposed to panic. What in the... Someone in the crowd whispered. Caleb started talking low, steady, not loud enough for anyone outside the corral to make out the words, just a quiet murmur, like he was telling the horse a secret. Devil's Shadow's ears shifted, still pinned back, still tense. But listening, actually listening. Ellie's grip on the fence rail tightened without her realizing it. Caleb took one slow step forward. The horse threw his head up, warning him off. Caleb stopped, turned away slightly again, kept talking. This went on for what felt like forever, 10 minutes at least, maybe longer. The crowd was dead silent, collectively holding its breath. Then something remarkable happened. Devil's Shadow took a step toward Caleb. The crowd nearly lost their minds, but somehow everyone managed to keep quiet, like they all instinctively knew that one wrong sound would break whatever spell was happening in that corral. Caleb let the horse approach, still not looking directly at him, still murmuring. Devil's Shadow got close enough to sniff his shoulder, then his hat, then his hand. Caleb stayed perfectly still through all of it. Then, slow as sunrise, Caleb raised his hand and touched the horse's neck. Devil's Shadow flinched but didn't bolt. Caleb just kept his hand there, steady, rubbing slow circles while he kept talking in that low voice. The stallion's muscles gradually, visibly unbunched. His ears shifted from pin to neutral. His breathing slowed. Is that horse actually calming down? A ranch hand behind Ellie said, "Shut up," she said. She couldn't look away when Caleb finally reached for the bridle. Devil's Shadow let him when he put his foot in the stirrup. The stallion trembled but held when he swung up into the saddle. Every person watching held their breath. Devil's Shadow exploded because of course he did. Old habits die hard, even for horses. But here's where Caleb was different from every other rider. He didn't fight back, didn't yank the reins, didn't spur hard, didn't try to muscle the horse into submission. He just moved with him, fluid, relaxed, like they were dancing instead of fighting, like he'd been riding this exact horse his whole life and knew every move before it happened. The horse bucked left. Caleb went left, horse spun right. Caleb was already there. Horse dropped his head for a serious buck. Caleb sat back and rode it out like it was nothing. 8 seconds passed, then 15, then 30. People started counting out loud at some point. Ellie wasn't even sure when, but the numbers kept climbing and Caleb kept riding and Devil's Shadow kept fighting but with less conviction. Every passing second, at about the 2-minute mark, something shifted. The stallion's bucks got smaller, his spin slowed, and then, gradually, like a thunderstorm running out of rain, he stopped fighting altogether. He just trotted, then walked, then stopped in the middle of the corral. Sides heaving, but calm, Caleb sat easy in the saddle, one hand resting on his thigh. Looking for all the world like he'd just taken a casual afternoon ride, the crowd absolutely lost it, whooping, hollering, hat-throwing, the kind of noise that probably scared birds 3 miles away, but Caleb didn't acknowledge any of it, just looked down at Devil's Shadow and said something quiet, patted the horse's neck, and dismounted as casual as you please, Ellie. Dropped off the fence and walked into the corral on slightly unsteady legs. Not that she'd ever admit that. That was either the most skilled thing I've ever seen or the luckiest, she said. Caleb looked at her with those calm, unreadable eyes. Wasn't luck? Then what was it? He glanced back at Devil's Shadow, who was standing quietly, the most quietly he'd stood probably in years. Horse wasn't mean, just scared, and nobody bothered to ask him why. Ellie stared at him. You got the job. Caleb, yes, ma'am. He nodded once, then walked over to Devil's Shadow and started removing the saddle as casually as if it was just another Tuesday. Ellie watched him for a moment, something complicated moving through her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. Behind her, one of the ranch hands whistled low. Boss, where'd you find that guy? I didn't, she said quietly. He just showed up. 2 weeks in, and the Marsh Ranch was already a different place. Caleb had this quiet, methodical way of fixing things that drove Ellie slightly crazy because she couldn't find fault with any of it. He'd identified 3 fence lines that were about to fail before they actually failed. He'd reorganized the feed storage system so they were wasting 30% less grain. He'd figured out why the south pasture drainage was flooding every time it rained and fixed it in one afternoon with a shovel and some elbow grease. The ranch hands liked him, which was maybe the most surprising thing. Cowboys were notoriously picky about foremen, too harsh and they'd grumble, too soft and they'd walk all over you. Caleb had found some invisible middle ground where he was respected without being feared, firm without being mean. He never raised his voice. Never needed to. Even Devil's Shadow had transformed. The stallion who terrorized every human being for 3 years was now following Caleb around the corral like a oversized, extremely dangerous puppy. Ellie watched all of this from a careful distance, genuinely impressed and genuinely suspicious in equal measure. Because here was the thing about Caleb, he was real good at being helpful and real bad at being known. 2 weeks of working alongside the man and she still couldn't tell you a single solid fact about him. Where he was from, where he'd worked before, whether he had family somewhere. Every personal question got deflected so smooth and natural you almost didn't notice it happening. Almost it. Was a Tuesday when everything went sideways. Ellie was looking for the missing ranch ledger. She'd been tracking some inconsistencies in the supply accounts and needed last month's records. She'd already checked the office twice, the bunkhouse, common room, everywhere. Then she remembered she'd left some paperwork on the workbench in the main barn while Caleb was fixing tech. She went to the barn. Caleb was out in the north pasture fixing fence with the hands. His saddlebag was hanging on a hook near the workbench. She wasn't snooping. She really wasn't. She just bumped the saddlebag reaching for the ledger, and it fell, and stuff spilled out, and there it was. Face up on the barn floor. A wanted poster. Creased and worn like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The drawing on it looked like Caleb's same jaw, same eyes, same general build, but the name underneath said Cal Holt, $200 reward. Wanted in Beaumont, Texas for the murder of one James Whitfield. Ellie stood there for a long minute, poster in her hand. Her brain doing that thing where it tries to process information it really doesn't want to process. Her new foreman. The man she'd handed the keys of her operation to. Wanted for murder. She was still standing there when she heard boots on the barn floor. Caleb stopped in the doorway. Took one look at her face. took one look at what was in her hand, and went completely, utterly still. Neither of them said anything for what felt like 10 years. "It's not what it looks like," he finally said. "It looks like a murder warrant with your face on it." Then, "It's exactly what it looks like." He walked in slowly, like he was approaching a spooked horse, which under the circumstances Ellie found extremely ironic. "But it's not the whole story." "Then you better give me the whole story. Right now." Caleb took off his hat, turned it in his hands. Ellie had never seen him look anything but calm. But right now something underneath the calm was showing through. Something tired and worn and sad in a way that went bone deep. 3 years ago, I was working a cattle operation down in Beaumont, Texas, he started. Good outfit, decent pay. My boss was a man named Victor Strand. Big cattleman, lots of land, lots of money, lots of people who owed him favors. He paused. Turns out lots of people owed him favors because he collected them like other men collect debts. Meaning if you didn't give him what he wanted, bad things happened. What kind of bad things? The kind that happened to a homesteader named James Whitfield. Caleb's jaw tightened. Strand wanted Whitfield's land. Whitfield wouldn't sell. One night I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, came back to the bunkhouse early, saw things I wasn't supposed to see. He stopped. Strand shot Whitfield himself, point blank. Then turned around and saw me standing there. Ellie felt cold. He framed you. He owned the sheriff, the judge, half the town council. By morning there was a warrant out for my arrest. I ran because staying meant hanging for something I didn't do. You could have fought it. With what? Strand had money, power, and connections. I had $40 and a horse. His voice wasn't bitter exactly, just tired. So I ran. Changed my name slightly, figured if anyone checked, close enough to answer to but different enough to confuse a quick search. Been moving ever since. Working jobs, staying under the radar, never in one place long enough to get comfortable. He looked at her steady. Then I came here. Ellie sat down on a hay bale because her legs suddenly needed a break. She looked at the poster, then at Caleb, then at the poster again. You got any proof? Any witnesses? Anything that backs up your story? Nothing solid. Couple of ranch hands who saw things that night but were too scared of Strand to talk. Man's got a long reach. He nodded at the poster. What are you gonna do? That was the question, wasn't it? She could turn him and collect $200 and get herself a whole heap of legal trouble that might satisfy the railroad folks temporarily. She could ask him to get rid of the problem, go back to struggling without a foreman who actually knew what he was doing. Or she could trust a wanted man with everything she had. None of those options were great. She looked at him for a long moment. Thought about devil shadow scared, not mean, nobody bothering to ask why. Thought about 2 weeks of watching this man work with integrity and care. Thought about how a liar and a murderer probably doesn't spend his evenings talking gently to a traumatized horse. The south pasture drainage fix, she said finally. He blinked. What about it? That's gonna hold through the spring floods? A long pause. Yes, ma'am. I graded it proper. Good. She folded the poster and tucked it in her pocket. Because I need that pasture operational by April, so I need my foreman here through April at least. She stood up, brushed hay off her pants. We'll deal with the rest of it after that. Caleb stared at her. Just like that? Just like that. She picked up the ledger from the workbench. But Caleb? No more secrets. Not on my ranch. He was quiet for a second, then nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Gerald Croft arrived on a Wednesday, which was already 2 strikes, against him because Wednesdays were fence repair days and Ellie hated being interrupted during fence repair days. He rolled up in a fancy carriage. That was completely ridiculous for Montana. Terrain all polished wood and brass fittings, already coated in a layer of prairie dust that it absolutely deserved. 3 lawyers climbed out behind him like expensive, useless ducklings. Croft himself was maybe 50, soft in the middle, hard in the eyes. Wearing a suit that cost more than Ellie's monthly payroll, he looked around the ranch with the expression of a man calculating what everything was worth. Not admiring, calculating. Ellie came down from the fence line, work gloves still on, not remotely interested in making him feel welcome. Caleb fell in beside her without being asked, just appeared at her shoulder like he'd been there all along, quiet as a shadow. Mrs. Marsh. Croft smiled with his mouth only. Gerald Croft, Continental Railroad Development Company. Lovely place you have here. You're not here because you think it's lovely, Ellie said. What do you want? Croft blinked, apparently unaccustomed to women who skipped the pleasantries. He recovered fast, pulling out a leather folder and handing it to her with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this many times before. We're prepared to offer you $40,000 for the ranch and all associated land holdings. It's an extremely generous offer, Mrs. Marsh, more than fair market value considering the current. No. Another blink. I'm sorry? No, not selling. Ellie handed the folder back without opening it. We done here? Croft's smile got thinner and more dangerous. Mrs. Marsh, I don't think you fully understand the situation. The railroad is coming through this valley regardless. The only question is whether you profit from it or what. Caleb's voice was quiet, but something in it made Croft's lawyers shift uncomfortably. Croft looked at Caleb for the first time, and something flickered in his expression. Just for a second, quick, almost invisible. Recognition? Suspicion? It was gone before Ellie could pin it down, replaced by smooth businessman condescension. And you are? Foreman, Caleb said simply. Right. Croft turned back to Ellie, dismissing Caleb like he was furniture. Mrs. Marsh, eminent domain is a legal reality. If you force us to pursue that route, the compensation will be significantly lower. The process will be lengthy and expensive, and frankly, he leaned slightly forward, you'll end up with nothing worth having anyway. Sell now while our offer is generous. That sounds like a threat dressed up in business language, Ellie said. I prefer to call it practical advice. I prefer to call it what it is. Ellie stepped closer, and to his credit, Croft didn't step back, though his lawyers definitely edged sideways. This ranch has been in my family for 15 years. My husband is buried on that hill over there. I built this operation from nothing after he died, and I'm not selling it to you or anyone else. So you can take your fancy carriage and your lawyers and your practical advice back to whatever railroad office you crawled out of. Dead silence. One of the lawyers actually wrote something down, which seemed insane. Croft let the silence stretch, then smiled again, and this smile was different, cold, final. The smile of a man switching from nice to nasty. 30 days. Mrs. Marsh, you have 30 days to reconsider before we begin eminent domain proceedings. He picked up his folder. The offer drops by half once lawyers get involved. Just so you know. He turned and walked back to his ridiculous carriage. The lawyers waddled after him. Ellie watched them go, arms crossed, jaw tight. Caleb stood beside her saying nothing until the carriage disappeared down the road. You recognized him, Ellie said. Not a question. Caleb was quiet for a beat too long. What makes you say that? Because you went real still when he looked at you. Same way you go still when you're thinking hard about something dangerous. She turned to look at him. Who is he? Caleb watched the dust cloud where the carriage had been. Croft worked with Strand. Back in Texas. They ran land schemes together. Strand would use muscle and local corruption to pressure landowners. Croft would come in with railroad money and legal threats to finish the job. His voice was flat, controlled. They've done this before. A lot. Different territories, same playbook. Ellie felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. So this isn't just about railroad tracks. No, ma'am. Your land sits on the most valuable section of this whole valley. Strand probably identified it months ago and sent Croft to acquire it. Caleb turned to look at her. This isn't a railroad deal, Ellie. It's a land grab. And Strand always gets what he goes after. Always? Almost always. Something hardened in his eyes. He didn't get Whitfield's land. Whitfield died before he could sell it, and the legal mess kept Strand tied up for 2 years. A pause. That's probably why Whitfield isn't the only man Strand has killed. The weight of that settled over them both. There's something else, Caleb said quietly. The way Croft looked at me. I think he recognized me. Or close enough to make him suspicious. He met her eyes directly. Which means he's probably already sending word to Strand that I'm here. Ellie processed this. Her ranch was being targeted by the same corrupt network that had destroyed Caleb's life. Bounty hunters would be coming. Strand would be coming. 30 days that were actually probably less. Well, she said after a moment, guess we better stop standing around talking about it. Guess so. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Croft kept records of every deal he's made. Men like that document everything because they like having leverage over people. She looked at Caleb. And I'm thinking we're not the only ranch he's threatened. There are other families in this valley who've gotten the same visit. Caleb nodded slowly. Build a case. Multiple victims, documented pattern, enough evidence that even Strand's connections can't bury it. You in? He looked at her for a long moment, something moving behind those steady eyes. Something that looked a lot like a man deciding whether to finally stop running and start fighting. I'm in, he said quietly. Ellie nodded once. Then let's get to work. Behind them. Devil's Shadow whinnied from the corral like he was. Putting in his vote, they were going to need it. Asterisk, Caleb knew they were coming before anyone else did. It was something in Devil's Shadow's behavior. The Stallion had been restless all evening, pacing the corral fence, ears rotating like satellite dishes, picking up signals nobody else could hear. Caleb had learned to trust that, horse's instincts more than most people's common sense. He'd spent the last week preparing anyway. Not panicking, not running, preparing. Because running wasn't the play this time. Running meant Ellie lost everything, and that wasn't happening on his watch. He'd quietly repositioned the ranch, hands into strategic spots without explaining exactly why. Extra lanterns placed where they'd illuminate approaches to the barn and main house. Devil's Shadow moved to the back pasture where fire couldn't reach him easily. The evidence they'd gathered testimonies from 4 neighboring ranchers. Copies of Croft's correspondence that Charlotte had smuggled out, land deed discrepancies going back 7 years, locked in a strongbox and buried under the floorboards of Ellie's office. At dinner, he'd told Ellie, tonight, stay close to the house. She'd looked at him over her coffee cup. How close? Armed close. She'd nodded and gone to get her shotgun without another word. God, he appreciated that about her. No dramatics. No questions, just action. They came at midnight, exactly like Caleb expected. 6 men, riding dark, no lanterns, dark clothes. Moving quiet, professional. Strand didn't send amateurs. What Strand's men didn't know was that Caleb had spent 3 years staying alive by thinking 3 steps ahead of exactly this kind of situation. The first 2 riders hit the trip lines Caleb had rigged across the north approach. Nothing deadly, just enough to bring horses down hard and create noise and confusion. The crashes brought the ranch hands up from the bunkhouse exactly like Caleb had positioned them. North fence. Someone shouted. All hell broke loose. Gunfire cracked across the ranch yard, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like lightning. Caleb moved through it all with controlled purpose. He'd mapped this yard in his head 100 times, knew every shadow and corner and line of cover. He took down one man coming around the barn, disarmed another who'd gotten tangled in the trip line, and was more embarrassed than dangerous. But they'd brought fire. 2 men broke toward them, barn with torches, and there it was. The move Caleb had been most afraid of. Fire was the great equalizer, the thing that could turn a tactical advantage into catastrophic loss in minutes. He was moving before the torches hit, but he wasn't fast enough. The barn's east wall caught. Fire! Get the horses! Someone screamed. And then everything went sideways, because while Caleb was dealing with the fire, Croft appeared from nowhere with 2 men he'd been hanging back, waiting. The snake and grabbed Ellie off the porch before anyone could react. Caleb turned at her shout and froze. Croft had her arm twisted behind her back, one of his men pressing a gun to her temple. Ellie was furious rather than scared, jaw set, eyes blazing, which was exactly the kind of woman she was, but there wasn't much fury could do against a gun. Stand down. Croft shouted over the chaos. Everybody stand down right now. The gunfire sputtered and died. Ranch hands stopped moving. Caleb stood in the middle of the yard, the burning barn painting everything orange behind him, hands slowly raising. Croft smiled the nastiest smile Caleb had ever seen. There he is. Cal Holt, Strand's been looking for you for 3 years, boy. It's Caleb, Ellie said tightly. Get your hands off me. Shut up. Croft didn't even look at her, kept his eyes on Caleb. Here's the deal, fugitive. You hand over whatever evidence you've been gathering, and you come with us peacefully. Do that, and Mrs. Marsh and her people walk away from this. And if I don't? Croft shrugged casually, like they were discussing cattle prices. Then this ranch burns to the ground with her in it. Your choice. You got about 30 seconds. Caleb's mind was running hard and fast. The evidence was buried. They wouldn't find it easily. But Croft didn't know that. The barn was burning, but the ranch hands had already started a bucket chain. The fire was bad, but not catastrophic yet. Most importantly, Devil's Shadow was in the back pasture, spooked by fire and noise, and Caleb had deliberately left that gate with a weak latch. He caught Miguel's eye, his most reliable ranch hand, and gave the smallest nod toward the back pasture. Miguel got it immediately and disappeared into the darkness. All right, Caleb said, loud enough to keep Croft's attention fully forward. All right, you win. Evidence is in the office under the floorboards. I'll show you. He started walking slowly toward the house, keeping his hands visible, keeping Croft's eyes on him. You mind telling me one thing? Whitfield. Did Strand give the order, or was that your idea too? Croft snorted. Whitfield was Strand's call. Man was stubborn as a mule. He shrugged again. Just like you. Good. Caleb's voice was completely calm. I needed that on record. Croft's eyes narrowed. On rec, that's when 1,600 pounds of terrified, furious Stallion came screaming around the corner of the barn. Devil's Shadow had always been scared, not mean. But right now, with fire and smoke and strangers everywhere, scared and mean had merged into something absolutely spectacular and dangerous. The Stallion hit Croft's group like a freight train. Men scattered, horses panicked, guns went flying. Croft released Ellie instinctively to save himself, which was the wrong call because Ellie immediately drove her elbow into his ribs, so hard he doubled over. Ranch hands swarmed from every direction. It was over in maybe 90 seconds. When the dust and chaos settled, Croft was on the ground wheezing. 4 of his men were disarmed and sitting against the fence, and the remaining 2 had apparently decided the hole. Operation wasn't worth their health and ridden off into the darkness. Caleb walked over to Croft, crouched down, and held up a small device, a wire recording apparatus he'd borrowed from a traveling journalist passing through town the week before. "Set it on record," Caleb said quietly. "Whitfield. Strand's call. Your own words." Croft stared at it with pure horror. Ellie appeared beside Caleb, shotgun loose in her hands, hair wild, absolutely magnificent. She looked down at Croft with complete contempt. 30 days, you said?" She tilted her head. "You're about 29 days early." Behind them, the ranch hands had the barn fire almost out. Devil's Shadow stood in the yard, chest heaving, wild-eyed, looking like he'd just saved everybody's lives, which, honestly, he had asterisk. The charges against Caleb were dropped on a Thursday morning, which felt weirdly anticlimactic for something he'd been running from for 3 years. Marshall Reed from the territorial office rode out to the ranch, personally to deliver the news apparently, when you had a wire recording of a railroad executive confessing to knowing about a murder, combined with testimonies from 4 neighboring ranchers, combined with Croft singing like a canary the moment they threatened him with a 20-year sentence. The legal machinery moved surprisingly fast. Strand had been arrested in Texas 2 weeks prior. His whole operation was unraveling like cheap threadland fraud charges, murder conspiracy, labor violations across 4 territories. Turned out Caleb wasn't the only person Strand had framed and run off. There were 3 other men with similar stories who'd been hiding in various corners of the West, all of them now coming forward. Marshall Reed shook Caleb's hand on the porch. "You're a free man, Holt. Sorry it took this long." Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice for a second. "Appreciate it." Reed rode away. Caleb stood on the porch for a long time after, staring at nothing in particular, feeling something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Safe. He felt safe. The ranch had come back strong. The barn damage from the fire had been repaired within 2 weeks. The whole valley had shown up to help, which apparently was what happened when word got out that the woman who'd stood up to the railroad was the same woman who'd almost gotten burned out for it. Neighbors Ellie barely knew showed up with lumber and tools and casseroles and righteous indignation, which was a real useful combination. The railroad had quietly abandoned its plans for the valley. Without Croft and without Strand's money backing the operation, the whole project collapsed. 3 other ranching families who'd already sold, under pressure, were in the process of getting their land back through the courts. Continental Railroad Development Company was having a very bad quarter. Devil's Shadow, meanwhile, had apparently decided that saving everyone's lives entitled him to special privileges. He'd taken to hanging around the main yard like he owned the place, which technically he kind of did. Caleb had started the formal breeding program. Ellie had always wanted the Stallions. First foals were already spoken for at prices that made Ellie's accountant actually smile for the first time in years. The ranch was going to be okay. More than okay. Charlotte well, there was no Charlotte in this story. That was the other one. Different tale. Ellie's story had different characters. What Ellie's story had was evenings on the porch. It had become their thing, entirely by accident and entirely inevitably. After supper, after the ranch hands had settled for the night, after the day's business was done, Caleb and Ellie would end up on that porch with coffee, watching the sun go down over the Montana hills. They didn't always talk much. Didn't need to. 3 months of working alongside each other through crisis and chaos had created a kind of comfortable silence between them that was its own form of communication. But tonight felt different. Tonight Caleb had something to say and couldn't quite figure out how to start saying it. Ellie, because she was Ellie, noticed immediately. "You've been thinking so loud I can practically hear it from over here." He laughed despite himself, a real laugh, which still surprised him sometimes. He'd gone so long without much to laugh about. Got something I need to say, figured. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Waiting, he looked out at the land, the hills going golden in the evening light. The horses moving in the pasture, the repaired barn standing solid against the sky. All of it built by this woman's stubborn refusal to quit. All of it something worth fighting for, worth staying for. My name is Caleb Holt, he said. My real name. Not Cal, not Caleb Hayes or Caleb Harrison or whatever other names I've used. Caleb Holt, born in Abilene, Kansas, 1842. My mama's name was Ruth. My daddy taught me horses. He paused. I haven't told anybody my real name in 3 years. Ellie was quiet for a moment. I know your name, Caleb. I know you do. That's not really the point. He turned to look at her then, full on, no deflecting. The point is I've been running so long I forgot what it felt like to be somewhere I didn't want to leave. And somewhere along the way between the horse and the railroad, and the midnight gunfight and all the rest of it, he stopped. I stopped wanting to leave. Ellie's expression was doing that complicated thing it did sometimes, where a dozen emotions move through it too fast to catch. Nobody's making you leave. Nobody's asked me to stay either. She raised an eyebrow. You need asking? Would be nice. She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then she looked back out at the land, and the corner of her mouth curved up in that small, real smile she didn't give out easily. You fixed my drainage. You tamed my horse. You helped me save my ranch from a corrupt railroad and a murderous cattle baron. She sipped her coffee. I think that earns you the right to stay as long as you want, Caleb Holt. That it? Don't push it. He smiled. Actually smiled the full version, not the careful, almost smile he'd been using for 3 years as protective cover. Yes, ma'am. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished going down and the stars started showing up over Montana like they had something to prove. After a while, Ellie said, without looking at him, for what it's worth, I'm glad you were number 26. 25 men failed before me. Exactly. She finally looked at him, and there was something warm and certain in her eyes that made 3 years of running feel like they'd been leading somewhere after all. 25 men came here to prove something. You came here and just were something. That's different. Caleb thought about that. About scared horses and corrupt railroads and wanted posters and midnight fires and the long, complicated road that had led him to this porch and this woman and this land. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess it is. In the pasture below, Devil's Shadow moved through the evening grass easy, calm, completely at home, just like his rider. Finally,